great to be here today. We're talking about innovation, in particular developer innovation and Amazon Web Services. And I am happy to have Doug Seven, Director of Software. How are you?
I'm great.
You're Director of Software Development for Amazon Code Whisperer. You lead the project.
That's right.
Very cool. And Harry Maurer, Director AWS Devops Services.
Yep, that's right.
Over the past several months, we've heard so much about generative AI, but I'm wondering what you think is really cool about it. What is it that you think developers are like intrigued about it? What is it that makes it so compelling? Because it almost seems like a next level.
Alex, what's not cool about it? It's generative AI, right?
Yeah.
This is like the coolest thing out there. You know, from a developer perspective, I think this is a great evolution of the kind of things we've seen in developer tools really over the last decade or two, in terms of developer tools trying to build capabilities that just make the process of building software easier. And the more that they can help with things like, oh, I type a class name, I hit period, and then it gives me the methods that are available in the class or the properties that are available in class. Things like that were sort of the simple innovations that happened a long time ago with things like IntelliSense. And now with generative AI, the idea that if we were sitting down together to code, we're both bringing some knowledge into this situation, and I might be doing something, and he's going to go, oh, don't do that. I got a better idea. You should do this. So the idea that you can apply, two sets of intelligence to a problem and come up with a solution is really cool. And now I can do that with a generative AI that's always there. It's ambient, it's ever present, and it's just working with me as I work. It's like super cool.
Is that the conversation you have with developers when you talk about generative AI? What do they say to you? What is it that you find compelling about it?
Yeah, there's it's going to generate code for me aspect, which is really neat because it takes away, a lot of the mundane stuff that you'd rather not do, or you'd rather focus on, more higher value things. But I think in our space, particularly when you talk about software development lifecycle, people think about a developer sitting down and writing code, and they always just mentally put themselves in the frame, oh, it's a new project, and they're going to start writing code. 90% of the time, you're joining a project that's already there, and you got to figure out what's going on, right? And you're going to, you have a wiki or someone who can explain it to you, but what I think is really neat about the generative AI stuff is helping me better understand what I'm already about to work on, right? So explaining what this last pull request meant, or explaining what this code actually does, or explaining why you're seeing this error. And it's like having that person right next to you, like I said, they would have to go to the team, but always having that ability to explain things to you right there is a huge productivity gain in a lot of cases.
So Doug, let's get into Amazon Code Whisperer, because I think that's a good segue. It's being positioned as an AI coding companion that generates whole line and full line function code recommendations in your IDE to help you get more done. What is it that you were thinking about when you were building out Code Whisperer? What was it that you thought you saw out there that you think we can differentiate, we can take this to a next level?
The fundamental problem is that being a software developer today is really difficult. Once upon a time, if you were a C++ developer, that's what you were. You were a C++ developer, and that's what you did. Or you were a web developer, and that's what you did. But nowadays, you're a developer, and you work across languages, you work across frameworks. One day, you might be working in JavaScript. The next day, you're working in Go. You're working on different frameworks. And it's hard to keep up. It's hard to be good in all of these things. It's hard to be up to date in all of these things. And so there's a lot of time spent, even in something you're familiar with, there's a lot of time spent refreshing your memory, refreshing yourself, going, oh yeah, I got to do this. I know how to do this. I don't remember. Let me go look it up. That ruins the fundamental thing we want developers to experience, which is this natural flow state of like, I've got a problem to solve. I'm thinking about that problem. I'm writing code, and I'm just kind of moving through it fairly fluidly. Every developer's experienced this moment where you're like, I'm just going, you kind of forget to eat, you forget what time it is, all of a sudden it's dark out, you don't know what happened, but you did a lot, you made a lot of progress. And so the more that we can help developers cultivate that experience by keeping you where you are, keeping you working on the thing you're working on, and helping you, like bringing that information to you. It's like Harry was saying, you join a project and you have to figure out what's going on there. Well, there's a lot of context in that project. And so if I'm going to write some code for that project, having that context be present and inform an AI on how it can help you and say, okay, well, if you're trying to do this particular task, you're trying to write a particular function, let me understand the context of where you're at, and let me recommend something for you. Let me give you a suggestion for the code that we think is going to solve the problem for you. And if it were right, you hit tab, you move on, you just saved yourself a whole bunch of time in doing something that would have otherwise been a little bit monotonous.
And One of the things that we talked about, Harry, before our discussion is this concept of all of those mechanisms that you really need to have in place so the software can be used in the manner that Doug is discussing. How does Code Catalyst provide that for developers?
Right. So take a step back. So Code Catalyst is an end-to-end integrated DevOps toolchain, right? So we provide developers everything they need to go from planning all the way through to deployment. And we're really geared on making it easy for teams to work together to deliver software. And we have this saying internally at Amazon that good intentions don't scale, meaning if you're relying on someone to check that code for you, or if you're relying on the fact that you think the developer was great and there's no bugs that are going on system, that's always going to fail. And so what you want to do is put these mechanisms in place to enforce what you want to have those good intentions to do. And good mechanisms have a way of inspecting and then being able to stop things from going through the system that shouldn't go through the system, a way to remediate them, and then a way to sort of investigate them. And what we wanted to do with Code Catalyst is bring all those tools together on a common sort of data plane where we could more easily provide those capabilities to teams. So another set of products that my team manages is the code services. And those code services are individual sort of point-in-time solutions for the DevOps process. So code build for building your software, code commit for managing your source code, so on and so forth. What they don't have is that connective tissue. And that's what we do with Code Catalyst, is we provide that connective tissue so that when someone does a commit, it'll automatically raise event. We can put a rule against that. We can stop a bad commit from happening. If we see code trying to get into production that hasn't been, say, a rule applied to it where two people need to approve it before it goes to production, we can stop that. And then as everything goes through the system, we're collecting all that data. And then that data can be used to generate generative AI type models where we can then do predictive things against it.
I see. So that's the intersection, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this is the flow the developer works through, right? They have their sort of inner loop where they're writing code, testing their code, validating their code, and then they're bringing that code into their shared environments where they're merging their code with their other developers. They're running it in a test environment. They're deploying it into production, right? So that entire workflow that a developer goes through needs help everywhere. Like these tools are great, and the more that we can stitch them together, and the more we can make that process really fluid, the better it is for developers.
So there's lots of aspects that go into that experience that you're talking about. Part of it is like avoiding the paper cuts, is a term I've heard discussed. This idea of paper cuts means what exactly? And through, for instance, using Code Catalyst, how is it helping you avoid those paper cuts? And then how does that then play into what you're talking about with generative AI?
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about from a managing the project aspect, and then Doug can talk about how it gets into the AI stuff. But we take a lot of lessons that we learn internally at Amazon, and we try to bring them to the tools that we provide to our customers as well. And Amazon's famous for this idea that if you build it, you run it, right? And so we expect a lot from our development teams to be able to do a lot of things, right? They've got to plan their work, they've got to execute on the work, they've got to operate their services once they're in production. And so this idea of paper cuts are all the little things that sort of take away from the ability to deliver the value to the customer, as opposed to that sunk cost stuff that you do operating the services. And the way we overcome that internally is we try to automate everything, including the most mundane things. And so two good examples of us bringing automation to developers inside of Code Catalyst is when you start a project inside of Code Catalyst, we give you the opportunity to start from what we call a blueprint. And a blueprint is a way to generate the entire project, everything you need from your source code to your tools, to the environments, and to everything that you're going to need to manage that. And so with 2 clicks and a couple minutes, you've got a fully functioning project that everyone can collaborate on. And that would take you normally hours if you had to do that manually. Another simple thing we do is you think about, we talk about, developers join projects. They don't necessarily always start projects, right? So we do help you start projects. We also help you join them. And one of the ways that there's a lot of paper cuts joining a project is just getting your system set up to work on that new project. As Doug said, I'm going from JavaScript on one project, Java on another, potentially C++ on the other one. I've got to make sure I got all the tools and all the setups. Well, what we can do inside of Code Catalyst is automatically spin up a dev environment for you to connect your IDE to that has all those tools already set up for you. So we automate all those paper cuts away. That time you would normally have to spend installing tools, configuring stuff, all that goes away with a click of the button. Whatever branch of the source code you're working on, we automatically spin up the dev environment for you, check out that code, and everything's there for you to start working, right? And again, as we talked about, like we're collecting all that data too, so we better understand how the customers are working with that and can feed back into these models.
So you talked about the blueprints. That speaks to me about hosted dev environments, which you really need, and that collaboration. And that automation speaks to the DevOps practices, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, and I think what's really interesting about this is you start to put all these pieces together, and it formulates the whole picture, right? You get a dev environment created as part of this blueprint process, and you get up and running. And now I've got my IDE connected to my dev environment, and now I've got a generative AI and Code Whisperer as part of that IDE. Yep. So not only did I get accelerated in getting going, but now as I'm starting to write my code, I get that acceleration through the generative AI to be like, okay, now I've got to do some work. I've got a problem I've got to solve. I've got to create software to build this thing. And I start by writing a comment with the intent. Oh, I need a function that does this. And then Code Whisperer suggests that function. And I look at it, I'm like, yep, that's right, tab, move on to the next thing. And so all of this is just this continuous acceleration of how do we apply our technologies, either by stitching them together or bringing new technologies like AI into this space to help developers just move faster. And really part of this too is like so much of the development is repeating things you've done before. Like, how many times are you writing for loops and doing some logic or doing some evaluation or building a class to represent a data object or something like this. And a lot of this is relatively boilerplate stuff. It's not the creative problem solving that you're doing. That's certainly a big part of software development is the creative problem solving. And that's where I'd rather spend my time. So if I can say, put a comment that says, I need a class to represent a student for an educational application, and all of a sudden a student class is generated for me. I'm like, cool, move on. Let me go solve the cool problem now. Let me go do that.
I want to get to the joy of work, but first I want to talk a little bit about the people who are using this, right? Are they beginners? Are they more advanced people? Are they both? What teams are they on? I mean, we hear a lot about security now, and there's really, when it comes down to it, it's about the team and how the team can function with the platform architect and the developer and the security people. How are you thinking about all these different aspects of that individual users and the teams that they're a part of?
I mean, at the end of the day, most of these tools you would think of these as pro dev tools, right? We're a development organization. We're responsible for building a line of business app or a mission critical app or whatever it might be. And so I'm coming at this with a knowledge base and some skill and some tenure in my background. When you think about how a generative AI works, we're predicting what we think you need. So as you're writing code, we're looking at the context of what language are you working in, what methods have you already written, what classes do you have. And then as you're writing your code or you're writing your intent in the form of comments, we're predicting what we think you might need. And we're making that suggestion. Now you as the developer have to look at that and determine if it's what, in fact, you want. Like, how good are we at predicting that and looking at that and saying, yeah, that's what I want, or it's about 90% of what I want, so I'm gonna go ahead and take that and I'll make a couple edits and I can move on. Or in some cases, no, that's not what I want. Maybe I didn't express myself in the comment very well, or maybe I'm just doing something different and I'm gonna move on past that. And so there is a level of like, you as a developer still have a responsibility as you're using these tools to use them and get what you need out of them. But these are accelerators, right? These are just moving you along.
And I think in Code Catalyst, our aperture is a little wider. But we do an interesting thing. We want to give you the flexibility, but we also want to be prescriptive. And what I mean by that is a lot of customers who come to AWS can sometimes be overwhelmed by the number of choices we have, right? There's just a lot of services to use, right? And we also have a lot of services that sort of, if you squint, might be very similar, right? So like, which container platform should I use? Or which database service should I use? And we provide a lot of information to developers on the right sort of constellation of services to use for a particular type of application. But what Code Catalyst helps you do is sort of take that next step. So a lot of times when we provided that information in the past, we would do it in the form of like a CloudFormation template or a stack, right? Within Code Catalyst, we take that CloudFormation template and turn it into a blueprint. And so we automatically will take those best practices, wrap it up with all the tools, all the source code that you need, and automatically build and deploy that application for you. So at the end of the process of using that blueprint, you've got a well-architected and designed application based on how we think you should do it for you to start working on, right? And that's if you choose to use a blueprint. If you don't use a blueprint, then you can start from scratch and you can be a pro dev and do what you want to do. So we try to meet a wider spectrum of developers, I think, with Code Catalyst.
Well, I'd like to conclude with this idea of the developer experience. And one of the themes that comes through when I'm reading about what you're doing and in our discussion is this idea of intent, right? You have a specific intent, and you talk about that flow, right? But I think there's also aspects of the job that may seem tedious, but they're just part of the job. And they're part of your routine. And they're part of just what you do. And like, it's not that you hate that, but it is something that you just have to do. How do you fit that all into the culture of what you're trying to build?
I think to some degree, there's the question of there's the things that have to be done, and should you be the one that does them is one question. So in other words, hey, there's this boilerplate code, it has to be written, somebody has to do it. Well, if an AI can do it and you can move on, great. It still has to be done, but it's not you having to sit there for 20 minutes writing out some code. It's generated for you in a couple of seconds and you can move on. And there's the aspect too of like what we haven't even talked about is, we're generating code, we're getting some suggestions, developers are contributing to that. So you have this hybrid of code that's been generated by an AI and code that a human has written. And then there's the question of, okay, well, have we unintentionally pulled into that code anything unwanted? Did we pull in an open source reference that we didn't want or didn't know that we were pulling? Like, this is one of the problems that developers have today, right? You go off and you copy some code from somewhere and you paste it, and it turns out you violated an open source license. Right. And so one aspect of what we do is ensure that when we're generating code, if we do have a reference to an open source license, we tell you about that. We say, hey, this code has a reference. You can go check the reference. Here's the link to it. You can see what if you need to attribute it or not. That's one aspect of it. And the other aspect is the security of it. Are we doing anything in the combination of generated code and human written code that would unintentionally create a security vulnerability? Did we hard code an access token? Did we accidentally code up something that had some SQL injection? We do a lot of work on the filtering of the AI generated code to make sure that the code that's coming to the developer is as good as it can be, but the hybrid of a person working in an AI generating code, you really don't know what could happen. Mm-hmm. And so the idea that we've actually introduced some of the things that we have on the server side that you would be as part of this DevOps workflow that Harry's talking about, where we have tools for doing security scanning. Once you commit your code, we can do some security scans and incorporate that as part of the process. Well, we move that to the left a little bit, bring that into the IDE, give the developer the opportunity to say, hey, I put some code in here, and the AI's put some code in here. I'm gonna go ahead and run a security scan on that and look for any of these known vulnerabilities so that before I commit my code, I can find those things, clean them up, and get that code in. And so that's all part of this process, and it kind of partially lands in this bucket of like, hey, these are things that somebody has to do.
Right.
Can it be an AI? Can it be a tool? If so, great. Let's enable that, and let's again free the developer up to apply their cognitive load to the creative problem solving, the unique and new stuff, not the mundane.
Right. There must be some aspect of, I think, too, of like integrations and managing APIs. I mean, what you're talking about is just like this whole flurry of things you got to be thinking about all the time.
So we talked about getting to that flow state, and I had this conversation with other people in the past. It's like, I think anyone who's been in software engineering for a while, you sort of go through these different stages of what gets you excited. The first time you actually got something to run, and the next time is with that first time you realize, like, I've been sitting here for 12 hours and I haven't eaten, that whole flow state. And then I think the next one beyond that is when people start actually using what you build. And what we're focused on is, you've got an application here and it's great that it's working for you, but how do we get that into the world where other people are using it? And how do you get to collaborate with others to build that? Because it's one thing for 1, 2, 3 people to be building a software product together. It's a different when you've got a team of 10 or teams of 10 trying to build something larger and more complicated. And there's joy in that as well, right? There's joy in seeing all that stuff move through these pipelines and just watching it flow very easily. And that's what we're trying to make. We're trying to put that into the product, that joy of seeing it being used and deployed and running for hopefully millions of people to consume. So, and there's all different parts of what we're trying to do there, whether it's making the CI/CD process easy, which can sometimes be a black box for a lot of people, making the dev experience easy to spin up the dev environments. For us, it's like the whole framework around building software as a team.
Well, Harry and Doug, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Alex. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you.